Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the third session of the Business Continuity and Resilience Speaker Series, presented in partnership with the International Institute of Security and Safety Management. I would like to begin today's session with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Tkaronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event and our participants may be joining from various locations, I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our speaker and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. As I will also be today's moderator, I'll just provide a brief background of myself. As mentioned at the start, I'm the operations coordinator at CFL York, where I work to support the activities and initiatives of the center in alignment with the vision, mission, and objectives of the center. I also hold a master's degree in disaster and emergency management from York University School of Administrative Studies, and I'm currently pursuing an advanced certificate in terrorism studies from the University of St. Andrews Handa Center for the Study of Terrorism and Political Violence. And so now it is also my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Gianluca Riglietti. Dr. Gianluca Riglietti specializes in business continuity management, crisis management, and supply chain management. He collaborates with organizations across sectors such as energy, banking, and insurance to strengthen their organizational resilience and navigate complex challenges. Gianluca holds a PhD in management engineering from Politecnico di Milano, where his research focused on the impact of business continuity management systems on supply chain resilience. With experience in developing thought leadership, he has authored blogs, research reports, and webinars for leading organizations. Gianluca also regularly speaks on resilience, offering practical insights to help organizations thrive. So with that, welcome, Dr. Riglietti. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And I will pass the floor over to you. Just before I do that, though, just one quick reminder to everyone in the audience. The chat is open for everybody to drop in general questions, or sorry, general comments and greetings. But we are only taking questions from the actual Q&A function. So if you could please use the Q&A box to ask your questions throughout the session, we will take them all up at the end of the presentation with the time that we have remaining at the end. And so with that, Dr. Riglietti, thank you again. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks to everyone who decided to join this webinar, and also to those who are gonna watch the recording later. Thank you for the invitation to speak on this series. I'm very excited to do it, and today we'll be talking about business continuity management. The title of my, or whether the subtitle of my presentation is Learning from Practice, because the idea will be to bring you cases from my research and the practice as a consultant that I've been involved in, and take you a little bit in those cases, in those situations, show you what it's like, what my experience was like, and see if maybe we can find some common ground and start a conversation, or keep the conversation going. So a little bit more about myself. I've been in the industry, in the business continuity management and organizational resilience industry for about 10 years. I started working at the Business Continuity Institute in 2015, and I worked as a researcher, publishing reports and delivering insights on topics of BCM and resilience. And then I went on to work as a consultant and do a PhD on it, specifically on the impact of business continuity management on supply chain disruptions. And today, most of the cases that you will see will be focused on how BCM helps mitigate the impact of supply chain disruptions. but of course, that will be based on general good practices that we use in the industry and that I have observed in different cases that I've seen through my research. So this is the agenda for today. First, we'll talk about business continuity management in general, because there are some differences in the way BCM is perceived across different sectors, across different industries, and across different conversations as well. For example, having had the opportunity to look at BCM in academia and industry, I've seen differences quite often in the literature and in the industry jargon. So I will give you what I perceive to be what is my preferred way to interpret business continuity management, as according to also international technical standards and regulations. And then we will move into some cases to see how BCM applies to practical cases and then real life events. So we will look at some cases of disruptions from shipping and logistics that I've observed through my research. Then we will look at digital service providers. So we will look at also digital supply chains, because what I've seen is that there are different challenges and different challenges between supply chains that rely heavily on physical operations and supply chains that rely on digital services. This is, of course, an obvious difference, but it hasn't been investigated that much. So what I've tried to do was to look into it a little bit deeper. And then, of course, we will look at exercises, tests, and simulations, because as one of my mentors used to say, a plan is not a good plan unless it's tested. So we will look at the importance of validating BCM measures and BC plans. And then we will look at how academic concepts on supply chain disruptions and supply chain resilience can connect with insights from practice. And then we'll have some key takeaways and questions that you're very welcome to ask.
Sorry, Dr. Riglietti, we're just not seeing your screen. I just wanted to
sorry, what?
We're not seeing your screen right now. I just wanted to
okay, so can you not see the agenda slide?
No, the screen's not, I think it's not being shared yet.
Okay. Sorry, apologies about that. You should see it now. Yes?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Now it's in full
screen.
So, thank you.
Thank you for telling me. So as I was saying, this is going to be the agenda. These are the 6 points. So introduction on BCM, then cases from shipping and logistics, as well as digital service providers, exercises, tests, and simulations, and then finally some connection between academia and practice. And then we will move to key takeaways and questions. So as I said, the first part will be about trying to define what business continuity management is. So as I said, I've seen variations of how BCM is perceived. Sometimes it is considered just as a plan. Sometimes it is considered as a plan and test. But really, what I believe BCM to be is an articulated and complex system that can be applied to organizations that can really not just deliver a plan, but help companies build a response capabilities that are flexible enough to help them react to different disruptions. So starting with top management commitment, which I believe to be the foundation of a BCM system. it's going to be really hard to deliver and implement a BCM system if you don't have the buy-in from top managers. They set the tone for the rest of the organization. I've seen this in the research. I've seen this in practice as well. If top management doesn't provide commitment, doesn't make time for BCM, it is quite difficult that other employees at different levels will do. So this is, it's already something that is quite challenging, but it is necessary, and it is something, sometimes BCM is defined as a top-down approach, which of course starts from the top, and then it's cascaded through the ranks. Now, this is in line with what international good practices and standards say, such as ISO standards, such as ISO 22301 on business continuity management. But it is the same principle that you will find across a number of other connected disciplines, such as risk management. It's the same. Information security, cybersecurity, it's the same principle. A lot of the principles that you find in BCM are aligned with these other disciplines. So having top management commitment is, in 99.9% of the cases, a prerequisite for the good outcome of the implementation of business continuity management system. And that is the first point. Then the second step, which is really important, is the analysis. BCM is essentially a function of gathering intelligence, gathering knowledge about the structural weaknesses of the organization, rather than, and this is somehow, this differs across the industry, different people have different opinions, but rather than looking at external threats, which is what many people would normally consider to be the starting point. Rather than looking at external threats, it's about identifying internal weaknesses, identifying strategic, high priority assets and resources, and protecting those. Now, what I mean by high priority assets is those resources, those assets, whether it's people, sites, IT applications, or suppliers, that you might need to recover first during a disruption. Now, it doesn't mean that they are more important than others, but they're just more urgent because there's a large number of processes and other resources that depend on them. So a classic example would be IT, right? So there's virtually every process, every business unit in modern organizations tends to rely on IT infrastructures. So of course, you're going to have to recover that first before you proceed to recovering other functions that are just as important as marketing or sales. But in the context of a disruption, you need to understand what you need to recover first so that other processes can be enabled as well. So the analysis is really important. And here you have the business impact analysis, you have the risk and threat assessment that personally I perform when I walk into organizations. Some professionals, they tend to be more risk agnostic and tend to disregard the risk and threat assessment. It's a choice. For me, it still has value, but the business impact analysis, for me, it's the real important step in here. And then, of course, you develop the plans based on the high priority resources that you have identified. You develop plans to protect those and to recover those first within pre-established times. And I'll spare you the jargon on this, but you define pre-established, you define certain recovery times, and you develop plans to recover high priority resources during those recovery times. Of course, you do that for also the other assets, but the high priority ones have, of course, the priority. Now, the plan is not necessarily the main outcome. Actually, it's not the main outcome of the program. The main outcome of a business continuity management program is to develop a response capability, to develop some kind of disruption orientation of the organization, to help them build some sort of muscle memory so that when something happens, they know how to react. And if something escapes the plans, you still have, sorry, I see someone connecting. And if a disruption has some unexpected twists and turns, you can still deal with that. So step number 4, which is also really important, is to build response measures and response capabilities. And the one way that you do that is by establishing a crisis management function. Within the scope of a business continuity management program, you should also raise awareness on crisis management and define structures that help the organization develop crisis management capabilities. What does this mean in practice? It means that you write a crisis communications plan, that you define clear escalation measures when there is an incident that may turn into a crisis, that you define clear roles and responsibilities, and you define who's going to be part of a crisis management committee in case an incident escalates to a crisis and poses an existential threat to the organization. So you have plans for incidents, but if they escalate to a full-blown crisis, then you need also, and localized disruptions can be managed by single departments, but if something escalates to a full-blown crisis, you need a crisis management team to operate. And that's what also what you need to prepare for within the scope of a business continuity management system. And then step number 5 is validation. So tests, exercises, audits, and we're going to see some cases about exercises and tests within this presentation. This is a key part. It's great for involvement because it's an active participation that you are stimulating there. It has high returns in terms of raising awareness and embedding processes, and also it sort of like measures the temperature of your preparedness, because maybe you think you've built a great plan, but if you test it and it doesn't work, then you need to sort of go back to the drawing board. Now you can see that arrow that goes from validation to top management, because after you run an exercise, you will write a report with lessons learned, and those lessons learned, you have to feed them back to your top management, to the business continuity manager if you're working from outside as a consultant, or if you're the business continuity manager, you feed that information back to those that were involved in the exercise. And that's how the cycle starts again. And then of course you embed those lessons learned, you see if there are some analysis that need to be tweaked, and so on and so forth. So there is really this idea of continual improvement in business continuity management, which should be treated as a living organism that changes and adapts as the organization changes and adapts as well. Companies today are not immutable; they never were. So they change with their operating environment, and to think that an analysis run 3 years ago might be relevant today is unreasonable. So there needs to be this continual feedback process from the activities to top management, to the different units, and so that the process, the business continuity management system is continually improved. And again, this also applies as according to standards that I mentioned before, to other disciplines. If we look at the standard on crisis management, on information security, health and safety, it's the same. So this idea of continual improvement is really important across several disciplines, and BCM is no exception. So now let's move on into some practical cases. The first type of supply chain challenges that I want to explore and their connection with BCM are regard physical supply chains. So through the research that I carried out in my PhD, I had the opportunity to interview different professionals from the shipping and logistics industry. So we talked to people from ports. We talked to people from global shipping companies. We talked to people in manufacturing, and then we also talked to people in the humanitarian field, which relies heavily on shipping and logistics to deliver aids, to deliver food, to deliver all sorts of goods and services to go and help different areas that are hit by extreme weather or other types of crisis. So um, based on these different case studies, I was able to observe specific challenges that occur to physical supply chains, and then we will see how they differ from digital providers, from digital supply chains. Of course, you have extended workforce, so a large amount of workforce, employees that need to be physically involved in operations that may be operating across a number of facilities that may be heavily specialized in using some type of equipment, in using some type of maneuvering, some type of machinery, and they need to you need to pretty much know how your skills match your operations, and you should be able to map those different specialized employees to make sure that that you know where your priorities are. So, for example, if there is a disruption, or for example, during the case of COVID, where when you of course you couldn't keep everyone in the facilities that you were operating. If you decide to send some people home, you need to know which are the ones that need necessarily to be on site and which are those that can be sent home and work remotely. In many cases, in industries such as shipping, logistics, and manufacturing, this is not an option. And in general, it's important to know that this is a challenge. Of course, you rely on extended workforce that works across different geographical regions sometimes, and it needs to be mapped out. And the same goes for sites and premises. So different plants, different storage rooms or warehouses where where a lot of people interact and come and go all the time. That is, of course, another criticality, and this is an industry that is heavily linked with their sites and premises. As I said, the option to do remote work sometimes it's just not there. So, for instance, one of the cases that I observed with a manufacturer based in Italy during the first wave of COVID was that they were still experiencing high demand in terms of their products, so they needed to manufacture their products, but they had to restrict entrance to their facilities, and had to restrict entrance to their facilities. And so, for example, and therefore the inflow of the flow of vehicles that could come into their facilities and bring those materials that they needed for production had to be reduced or at least slowed down. So in that sense, the sites could not receive all the supplies that they needed in order to produce and meet their demand. And in some sense, that had to be slowed down. So there was this critical aspect of a site that couldn't receive the materials that they needed despite a sustained demand. Equipment and tools. Again, you have in these industries, you have some employees that are heavily specialized in certain roles, and they know how to operate certain tools, certain pieces of equipment, certain machines. And if there's a disruption or there's some kind of restriction to access, you need to know whether you're not able to continue production because you're missing a key personnel, a key part of your personnel. And then of course you also have um, transportation challenges. This ranges from something that is extremely localized, such as the issue with the that I was talking about a minute ago about the manufacturer based in Italy. Um, but it ranges from something very localized to something that can be global, such as the blockage at the Suez Canal that we've seen a few years ago, or in some cases, vessels not being able to circulate through inland waters due to droughts. So you have large trends as well as localized challenges that can hinder transportation and therefore slow down production. So it's a very physical. These are all challenges that are very based on physical problems, on presence, on the ability to access certain sites, the ability to operate machinery and tools, the ability to move goods and move people in order to deliver services. So when it comes to your BIA, to running your business continuity, business impact analysis, you need to be able to map which of these resources you would need first in the most urgent period of time to resume operations. Because maybe some of them you don't need them immediately, but others you do. So it's in these cases what we observed was the need to focus on this kind of assets. So um, people being able to be present on site, machinery being available or being scarce, and the ability to move. Um, Something that was quite interesting, actually, two things that were quite interesting to me was one was in the humanitarian field. One challenge that they encountered was they needed cargo planes, and they were struggling, or actually they were scared that the supplier would ditch them, because when a supplier um, has can only can has to operate at a reduced capacity, in that case it was because of the pandemic, and it needs to it only has capacity for 3 out of their 10 clients, let's say. Of course, they're gonna pick the clients that are most important to them. And we've seen a lot of cases during the pandemic of people not being able to rely on their suppliers because those suppliers could only had capacity for a few customers, and they were picking others rather than them. So in the case of the humanitarian field, they were actually able in the end to find these cargo planes and use these cargo planes, but they were quite scared that they wouldn't be able to have them available. So that was quite interesting to me. The other thing that I observed that I thought was quite interesting, it was in the regarding the port authority, which was based in the UK, the United Kingdom. Um, it is often one of the main arguments that some people use um, in healthy discussions, of course, to challenge when the business continuity management, when they have doubts, is that these practices, these principles, the ones that I talked about in the previous slide, they don't work in practice, because it takes time, because it's not realistic to run a BIA for every unit and to run tests and simulations. It's something that it's wishful thinking, but you're never actually going to do it. And what I saw was that there was an amazing implementation of a BCM system in this port authority, almost by the book. So there was a business continuity manager that was having meetings with different heads of departments, including the head of logistics. And the head of logistics was implementing these principles to the letter, and they were working in practice, and it helped them be more prepared when the different waves of the pandemic struck. So I found that quite interesting and it was a real life confirmation that these principles can be applied in practice also when you have complex operations such as in shipping and logistics. Now, digital providers. Here we have quite a different landscape. The other one is heavily based on presence, sites, equipment. And here, when it comes to organizations such as in the field of banking and finance, we have a digital supply chain. So these companies, they rely on other providers that provide them with software solutions, that provide them with legal advice, with cloud solutions, with IT services. So it is all digital, but it's still a supply chain. They outsource their data to data centers, and here you have an ecosystem where you have a company that relies on a number of suppliers that hold their data, they hold their IT infrastructure, they hold their I don't know, ability to be compliant with different regulations. In the case of legal advisors and so on. So this was very different, and it is not very well investigated because sometimes it's not regarded as a real supply chain, but it is. And banks are still a critical infrastructure as much as a shipping provider. So I thought this was also different type of environment, but it's still quite interesting to address. So what are the priorities here when it comes to digital supply chains? Software solutions, of course, like a lot of organizations rely on providers for different types of software that can do anything really. Compliance issues. The banking and insurance sectors are the most heavily regulated in the world when it comes to business continuity, risk management, resilience, information security. We are now looking at Digital Operational Resilience Act in Europe. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it, maybe those based in the EU, which is essentially a binding regulation which forces companies in banking, insurance, and a whole other lots of digital services to build business continuity management measures, crisis management measures, risk management measures, something that just wasn't there before. And now it's going to be binding starting from the 17th of January. And so those that had not done it before, now they are sort of rushing to implement these measures. And of course, those that were already prepared because they wanted to be resilient, now they're going to have an advantage also in being compliant. In the UK, you have the operational resilience policy that kicked in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. There are also similar regulations in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and in the United States as well. And in general, I think in Australia as well, I can see a lot of regulators moving towards this approach to regulate resilience, at least for the banking, finance, and insurance sectors. So you have this compliance issue, which is also a reputation issue, because for such institutions not being able to comply and failing to comply and getting fines is also a reputational challenge. Then, of course, you have IT dependencies. As I said, these are companies that operate mainly digitally. So some banks, they don't even have physical offices anymore. They all work remotely. They're also, in case of a physical disruption, they're able to let nearly all of their employees, in most cases, work from home. So they don't need to rely on sites, on equipment or machinery. But of course, then they have other priorities such as safeguarding reputation because they are heavily regulated. And because in my experience, if they suffer a disruption or an incident or a crisis, they are more likely than other sectors, the companies in other sectors, to end up on the headlines of newspapers. They need to manage their crisis communications well. I've seen countless headlines of companies banks or insurance companies being hacked, losing data, experiencing outages. So it is also a matter of reputation. And if you are delivering a sound business continuity management system, you should, as I showed in one of the first slides, implement a crisis management, build a crisis management structure that includes crisis communications. What does that look like in practice? It means that when there is a media crisis or a crisis of any kind, the crisis management committee with defined roles and responsibilities meets up. They appoint a spokesperson to talk to the media, and also they give instructions to their personnel on how to communicate or not communicate with the media in order to have one voice and deliver consistent messages to the public. Of course, this is there is something that a specification that I need to make. It's one of the basic principles of crisis communications. It is to be honest, which might seem obvious, but sometimes it's not. There are some ethical dilemmas that pop up sometimes when in these situations. Our policy is that honesty is always the best choice for several numbers, for a large number of reasons. One being that you know, if you lie and you're caught, you shouldn't do it in the first place. But if you lie and you're caught during a crisis, none of the next statements that you're gonna make are gonna be credible. So you should always tell the truth. So this is the different environment of digital providers that rely heavily on digital solutions. It's very different from the shipping and logistics field, and yet with the business continuity management system applies to both. Different parts, different sides, but it applies both to supply chain that operate in the digital world and supply chains that operate in the physical world. Now, moving to the last bit of this presentation, I want to talk a little bit about simulations, about exercises, tests, and crisis simulations. So there are different types of different ways to test your BC plan. One of these is operational simulations. So your tests, your exercises may look like this. And essentially, this is a way to test your physical operations. This is specifically the pictures that you see on the right. They refer to crisis simulations that I ran with sorry, with an energy company in Italy. They have a hydroelectric plant that is built inside a mountain, and it goes five stories deep inside a mountain, and it there's a river that runs below the mountain, and it gets water from this river, and it turns that water into electric energy, electric power. What we did was we simulated flooding. We simulated the river flooding, the systems, the protective systems that they have in place malfunctioning, breaking down, and we were able to involve the firefighters to simulate a safety and rescue operation. What you can see at the bottom right of the screen is one of the firefighters posing as an injured employee, and the others essentially carrying him all the way up from the -2 level. And as you can see on the top left of the pictures, the it was quite deep. So it was quite an interesting test, it was quite impactful. Now, what are the main characteristics of a simulation like this? First of all, that uh, you're likely to have to involve third parties, such as the firefighters in this case. But in other cases, you might want to test a city outage, or an outage in a certain part of a city. If you're working again with an energy provider, you may have to involve law enforcement or the police or the emergency services, and so on and so forth. You need high levels of coordination and communication, because here it's not just a bunch of people talking around the table. This is, you're essentially blocking an operational site. Of course, it's still running, but you are occupying an operational site. You're bringing a lot of people into a plant, or anyway, a physical site where there might be health and safety challenges, which is the third point. And of course, therefore, your coordination needs to be sharp. It needs to be on point. One thing about this kind of simulations is what you're doing here essentially is you're injecting chaos into a calm environment, or a normal environment. These people are experiencing an everyday, a regular day at the office or at the site, and you are purposely injecting chaos and stress testing the response measures to see how they react. So sorry. So they will be subjected to pressure. They will have to take quick decisions. They will be under pressure. They will be emotional. If you are organizing it, you need to be in control. You need to know what is happening. You need to be able to remove yourself from the situation, not be carried away. Also, because you need to write an evaluation on how the exercise went. And at the end of the day, you need to provide them some lessons learned. Then you need to tell them what worked and what not. And you need to talk about it with them. At the end of the day, it's not just about having a field trip. It's about providing some concrete ways to improve your response measures. Of course, the return of doing something like this, it's that apart from being a very fun day, it it has a higher impact on awareness levels. Of course, something like that, if you do it, you're gonna remember it in a year, 2 or 3, and you're gonna remember also the discussions that came from it, and also you're gonna build connections, you're gonna share an experience. So it has some kind of also emotional impact that stays over time, and so it is one of the most rewarding types of exercises, types of activities that you may run. But simulations can also look like this. So this would be the case of tabletop simulations, which we usually run with top management when we need to simulate a crisis that of course involves high-level executives. Sorry. That involves high-level executives. And here, it's a different environment. You're in a room, you are feeding a script to them, you're feeding injects that you've written on a script. And so you need to have very good soft skills, because you need to make sure that the script flows well, that you are keeping the rhythm up, you're keeping the pace up. It shouldn't become just, it shouldn't digress and talk about other things. It should be immersive, to the point that now some are starting to use AI to make these simulations more immersive with VR as well. But we can talk about that another day, because that's it's a whole it's enough material for another whole presentation. So you need to have very good soft skills. You need to build a credible scenario, because to be immersed, to be deeply involved in such a simulation, especially if you're working with very high level people within the organization, um, they need to sort of like suspend their sense of reality for a moment, right? It's like just like when you read a book or when you watch a movie, you follow the story. You don't stop to think whether that's just a script or those are just actors or those are just words in a book. You picture the scenario. You work also with your imagination. So you need to build a credible scenario, because the moment that the focus of the simulation moves to, oh, this is not a credible scenario, and they start challenging the credibility of the facts, that of the inputs, of the injects that they're being fed, then the simulation takes a wrong turn. So you need to have a credible scenario, you need to have right inputs, and you also need to be credible in the face of high level executives that have not a lot of time. They've made time for you, and so you need to be able to be quite catchy as well and be professional. Have your script, your story in order. This is something that I will never stress enough. Again, you are injecting chaos, but you need to be prepared. You need to have your setup in order, and you shouldn't come across as sloppy, because if you do, then you lose credibility and you cannot do this. The simulation is not going to work. Last slide. From theory to practice, this is how I believe that BCM, where this is, I believe, BCM's place in bridging the gap between academia and practice, between theoretical concepts and industry, everyday life. So when I was preparing my PhD, I had to do the theoretical part and look at what supply chain disruptions and supply chain resilience looks like in academia. And there are a number of definitions, but essentially they refer to the ability to recover from a disruption, respond and recover to a disruption in the supply chain, and bring operational levels to accept operations back to acceptable levels, which is quite in line with the industry definition. But then, of course, these concepts have been broken down into a set of capabilities. So, for example, there is a whole stream of literature on supply chain agility, supply chain flexibility, supply chain disruption orientation. So the ability for the company to perceive disruptions as something that is normal somehow, and know how to respond to them. You have supply chain coordination, you have supply chain communication as well. So all of these concepts, they've been articulated in the literature at a conceptual level. And also, it has been stated that they need to be operationalized, but the literature doesn't really say how, at least the literature that I saw. And I believe that that's where BCM practices play a role. So if you want to operationalize these supply chain capabilities, you implement a business continuity management system, and that will give you response and recovery measures to apply to your organization, which are, of course, resources that are unique to each company. Because if you take two companies that operate even in the same field, in the same sector, and you implement BCM in both of them, even if they have similar business models, same sector, they operate in the same city, it is very likely that the response measures are actually not going to be exactly the same. So there is, each response and recovery measure is peculiar to each organization, and a resource that is unique and hard to imitate. So for me, this is where BCM fits within the literature, and that's its role in helping build supply chain resilience and mitigate supply chain disruptions. And with that, I conclude. I hope that you have questions. I've seen already some raised hands and some questions. So please feel free to ask your questions, and I'll be happy to answer.
Well, just to start off, thank you so much, Dr. Riglietti, for that great presentation. As you mentioned, we did see some hands going up, and there is one question that I see already in the Q&A, so I just want to invite the audience to ask any questions they'd like. Either raise your hands and we can give you permission to talk and ask your question directly, or if you want to use just the Q&A box, that will also work. So just to get started with the first question that came in here from Michael Langley. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name, but so they say, you mentioned BCM, risk management, and information security management as separate disciplines that are aligned. But do you have any examples of organizations that have successfully unified these functions into an integrated risk management group or model at the corporate level? Or is there more of a tendency for these functions to operate in isolation?
So I've seen several, although I'm not sure how common it is to have this perfect integration. But one of the examples that struck me the most, it was a data center in Italy. It's called, the company is called Switch, I think, in the US, but then they have a different name in Italy. And they embodied the concept of resilience by design. They started thinking about resilience before they even built the site. So they looked at the area, the geographical area. They looked at the risk, the risk for flooding, the risk for earthquake, the risk for even physical violence, and they chose the spots based on that. So they did a risk assessment before building the site, and then they built the site with all the certifications and all the right processes. And then once it was built, they had a security manager that worked with that, of course, took care of the of physical security, so cameras, entry into the sites, access to the site. Sorry. Then in the same room, they had people working on cybersecurity, so with the screens and the computers, and I think they had a partnership with a famous cybersecurity company, and then they also had business continuity division within that fell under the security team, but the principles were all applied. And so they were implementing physical security, cyber and information security. They were implementing business continuity and risk management that fell under the security team. It seemed very, very sound, very solid to me. I'm not sure how effective in practice it was, but I haven't heard of any major incidents that they have or crisis that they have followed. But from the chats that we had, it was we were working with in partnership with them. They seemed very, very attentive to connecting all the different bits of the resilience disciplines, almost by the book. Other cases as well I've seen in the insurance industry, but Again, they focus mainly on digital services, and I've seen many companies that integrate infosec and crisis and business continuity and crisis management. Sometimes in some cases I saw also an operational resilience manager being nominated, which is, it was new at the time. Now maybe it's a bit more common. And under this person, there were different functions that fell, such as BCM, risk management, and infosec. Um, as well. So there are some cases, maybe I'm not sure they are the majority, but I think now over the last 10 years they have increased, especially um, with the new regulations, because the new regulations such as DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act in the EU, and the UK Operational Resilience Policy, they kind of force you to go that way. Then whether you do it or not, that's a different thing, but it kind of pushes you that way.
Great. Thank you so much for the detailed answer. Hopefully, Michael, that answered your question as well. And so I'll invite people just to ask. Maybe we can take a couple more questions. I do have one question here from Dr. Asghari, and maybe I'll open the floor after that for maybe one more question before we're out of time. So Dr. Asghari asks, have you used or come across the use of games in business continuity training and exercises, either physical games or virtual games?
Um, so yes, absolutely. I thought they would. So the first time I saw it, it was a virtual reality game. It was in 2018 in London, I think. There was this company that we were invited for a demo, and they simulated a poisoning incident with a highly poisonous agent. This was shortly afterwards. Two people were poisoned by alleged by the Russian intelligence services in the UK 5 or 6 years ago. So they ran this scenario, and so we were all very very emotionally involved in that. Um, and you had to basically make decisions and base. So you're in front of this screen, and you see the anchor person pop up and delivering the news. Um, and then that there's been an attack, and then from there you take charge, then you have to make decisions. And it's usually you have like three decisions that you can click and choose. And then you see whether you are getting yourself into a bottleneck or you're making the right decisions for the company to be, for the people to be safe and the company to keep operating. Now there's a lot of organizations that are using AI, that are using VR. Now it's become a major thing in the industry. I've been to one of the to the annual conference of the Business Continuity Institute, which is where most people in the industry meet up every year. It's impressive how over the last 2 years, AI has become such a dominant theme, and which is used for enhancing simulations and exercises. So I'm not sure to what extent that intersects with gaming, but I think it's pretty much that concept.
Great, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions from the audience, but maybe if there's time, I could ask you a question that I had from the presentation. So when you were talking about doing exercises, you were talking about making sure that the scenarios are credible, and not too far out there to get the buy-in of top management and make sure that people are taking it seriously. But I've seen in some of the literature the kind of the idea of once the more likely scenarios are exercised and you have plans for those, you start potentially looking at more of institutional crisis scenarios and more maybe more rare events. Where do you kind of see the line there between like common and maybe more credible to top management um, exercises and scenarios to maybe more black swan events and the need for testing out plans for something that may not happen or is rare that it may happen but could have a big impact on the company.
So it's a good question. First of all, I need to say that there's a difference between what we would like to do, what the scenarios that we come up that we think may be good, and also the level of challenge that we can bring to the company. So it depends how mature they are. Because if we bring a scenario of extreme disruption to a company that has just started to do business continuity 2 months ago, it's gonna be too hard, too difficult. You need to have, based on the level of maturity, you can aim for more complex scenarios, and sometimes a little bit also more serious, more out there. But in some cases, even medium difficulty scenarios can be quite challenging. So, for example, the um, exercise in the plant, in the hydroelectric plant that I showed, we had three levels. We had low, medium, and difficult, and we went for medium. So that was medium level difficulty, and still it was quite complex, quite challenging. But it also depends on the company and on the sites that you are operating in, how how easy or how hard it is to organize the simulation. So I would say as a general rule, it depends on the level of maturity. If a company is mature and they've done some exercises, then you can bring it up to a more high difficulty level. But of course, it needs to be relevant. You cannot just do difficult scenarios for just for the sake of of doing something fun. It needs to be relevant to the company. Otherwise, it's a little bit pointless.
Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much for clarifying on that.
Thank you for the
Um,
question.
and yeah, I see we're a little over time and I don't see any other questions from the audience. So I think it's probably a good place to stop. I I do have a couple more questions of my own, but I don't want to take up uh, too much more time since we are already over. So I would just like to thank you so much for the presentation. Um, it was great. It was I think quite thorough, and so maybe that's why there's not so many questions because you did cover a lot with quite a lot of detail. So yeah, thank you so much. It was great. I've seen a
Thank you
lot of
for
things in
attending.
the audience as well from the chat. So um, yeah, and so thank you, and I want to thank our partners as well at IISSM for helping us with the series and putting together these sessions. And of course, thank you to our audience for taking the time to be here today and interacting and chatting and asking questions. So thank you again
Thanks
to
to everyone
everybody.
who joined.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And just as one quick reminder, this is a monthly series, but we are taking December off for the holidays. So we will be back in January with the next session. So um, keep your eyes out for that email reminder in January for the next session. And uh, this session is being recorded, and like the other sessions before this will be up on our CFL York webpage for this event and also on our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to come back and revisit the presentation, please visit our YouTube channel or our website, and feel free to share the video within your networks as well to anyone who might find this useful or interesting. Yeah, and with that, just one last big thank you to everybody. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day and happy holidays. And we will see everybody back in January.
Thank you and happy holidays.